3,000 years ago, Moses received instructions about specific plants, specific quantities, and specific uses. Some were for purification ceremonies, some for healing, and some for a sacred oil formula that modern chemists have only recently broken apart and analyzed, compound by compound. For centuries, those prescriptions were treated as purely ceremonial. However, when researchers started running these plants through laboratories, what science found aligned with the ancient instructions in ways that continue to quietly change certain assumptions. These are 12 of those plants, and what science finally confirmed about each one. Number 1. Hyssop. If you were a Hebrew family on the night of Passover in Egypt, this was the plant in your hand. The book of Exodus gives the instruction plainly: take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in blood, and strike the lintel and the 2 doorposts of your house. The plant's role did not end there. The book of Numbers uses it again in the purification rite of the red heifer. Leviticus prescribes it for cleansing after skin disease. Hyssop appears in ritual after ritual connected to purification, always in contexts where something contaminated needs to be made clean. The Hebrew word is ezov. Scholars have debated exactly which plant it refers to, but the most accepted identification today is Oreganum syriacum, which you might recognize better as Syrian oregano. It grows across the rocky hillsides of the Sinai and Levant, often rooted in the cracks of stone walls, exactly the kind of surface the Israelites would have been applying it to. The plant is scrubby and low to the ground, with small gray-green leaves. Crush a sprig between your fingers and the fragrance comes up sharp and immediate. Oreganum syriacum contains exceptionally high concentrations of 2 compounds, carvacrol and thymol. If those names sound familiar, thymol is an active ingredient in Listerine mouthwash and in many modern sanitizing products. Carvacrol has been studied for its ability to disrupt bacterial cell membranes, killing pathogens like E. coli and Staphylococcus aureus in laboratory settings. Hyssop bundles dipped in liquid and pressed against surfaces, that description 3,000 years old, is essentially a delivery mechanism for broad-spectrum antimicrobial compounds. The Israelites were painting their doorposts with what modern science would classify as a botanical antibacterial agent. That is where this list begins. But the plant that comes next sits at the very center of something even more deliberate. Number 2. Mayach. Exodus chapter 30 contains the formula for the holy anointing oil, the oil used to consecrate the tabernacle, the ark, the altar, and the priests themselves. The first ingredient listed is liquid myrrh, 500 shekels of it. That is roughly 5.5 kilograms. This was not a trace ingredient. Myrrh was the foundation of the most important prepared substance in Israelite religious practice. Myrrh comes from Commiphora myrrha, a small thorny tree native to the dry coastal regions of Somalia, Ethiopia, and the Arabian Peninsula. When you cut its bark, a milky resin bleeds out, hardens in the dry air, and produces the bitter, smoky fragrance that has been traded across civilizations for most of recorded history. Egyptian embalmers used it in their preservation work. Greek physicians prescribed it for wound care, and Moses was told to make it the centerpiece of the anointing oil. Modern analysis has identified dozens of active compounds in myrrh resin. One group, called Furanoses quiterpenes, has attracted particular attention. The compound furanoiudesma 1,3-DNA has been shown to bind to opioid receptors in the brain, which may explain why myrrh appears repeatedly in ancient wound care and pain relief applications across Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek traditions. Beyond the pain pathway, myrrh compounds have demonstrated antimicrobial activity against the kinds of organisms that infect open wounds. Modern wound care research has quietly incorporated myrrh-derived compounds into formulations. The ancient world was not wrong about what this resin did. It had simply not developed a language yet for the molecular mechanisms it was using. The second ingredient in the same oil formula takes the chemistry somewhere different. Number 3. Cinnamon appears as the second aromatic in the holy anointing oil formula at 250 shekels of sweet-smelling cinnamon. The Hebrew word is cinnamon, one of the clearest direct correspondences between ancient text and modern botanical naming. It came from the inner bark of trees in the Cinnamomum genus, most likely Cinnamomum verum, the Ceylon cinnamon that was traded across the ancient Near East as one of the most expensive aromatics available. The primary active compound in cinnamon is cinnamaldehyde, the molecule responsible for its recognizable smell and flavor. Cinnamaldehyde is also a potent antimicrobial agent. Studies have documented its effectiveness against a range of bacteria and fungi, including Candida species. Research into its ability to disrupt microbial biofilms, the protective coatings that allow bacteria to resist treatment, has been published across food science and pharmacological journals over the past 2 decades. The aspect that has drawn the most sustained research interest is cinnamon's relationship with blood sugar. Cinnamaldehyde and related compounds appear to mimic certain effects of insulin and to enhance insulin sensitivity. Clinical trials have produced mixed results and no definitive medical guidance has been issued, but the direction of the findings is consistent across multiple independent research groups. A spice traded by weight across the ancient world, burned in sacred ceremonies, and added to the consecrating oil of the Israelite priesthood turns out to contain compounds that interact with some of the same metabolic pathways modern medicine is most focused on. The third ingredient in the formula is the most debated of all 12. Number 4. Calamus. The third aromatic in the anointing oil formula is translated variously as sweet calamus, aromatic cane, or fragrant cane. The Hebrew phrase is kane bosem, 250 shekels, the same weight as the cinnamon. The plant identification here is the most contested question on this list. Biblical scholars have landed in several different camps with no consensus. The leading candidate is Acorus calamus, a wetland plant with fragrant, knobby rhizomes that grows across the Middle East, Asia, and parts of Europe, and whose use across traditional medicine systems in India, China, and the ancient Near East is well documented for anxiety, epilepsy, memory loss, and digestive disorders. Some researchers have proposed Cymbopogon, a lemongrass relative with a similar aromatic profile. A small number of academics have argued for cannabis, a claim that has remained largely outside mainstream biblical scholarship, though it has attracted enough attention to generate serious published responses on both sides. If the identification is Acorus calamus, the pharmacological findings are worth sitting with. The root contains beta-acerone and several related compounds that have demonstrated sedative, anticonvulsant, and neuroprotective properties in controlled animal studies. The root of Acorus calamus has a characteristic cross-section of white pith surrounded by a thin aromatic outer layer, and in traditional preparation across South Asian and Middle Eastern practice, it was typically dried, powdered, and dissolved in oil or water before application. Regulatory agencies in the United States and Europe have placed restrictions on Acorus calamus in food products because high doses of beta-acerone have shown toxicity in prolonged animal trials. But the neurological activity is real and has been studied seriously in pharmacological literature. Consider the context of its use. An anointing oil containing calamus was applied to priests before they entered the tabernacle, a small enclosed tent structure filled with burning aromatic incense. You begin to understand why the compounding of this formula and the proportions of each ingredient might have required a source of knowledge that went beyond what experimentation alone could quickly provide. But what the formula does with the next ingredient is where the botanical sophistication becomes hard to explain away. Number 5. Cassia. The fourth and final aromatic in the anointing oil is cassia. 500 shekels, the same weight as the myrrh. The Hebrew word kida refers to Cinnamomum cassia, Chinese cinnamon, a close botanical relative of the cinnamon already in the formula. At first glance, repeating a plant family in the same preparation seems redundant, but the reason becomes clear in the chemistry. Cinnamomum cassia and Cinnamomum verum were recognized as distinct plants in ancient trade networks. Merchants in the ancient Near East kept them separate, priced them differently, and used them in different applications. The Exodus formula calls for both by name, in specific and different weights. While Cinnamomum cassia shares cinnamaldehyde with its relative, it has a distinct chemical profile that includes significantly higher concentrations of coumarin. Coumarin is not a minor compound. It is the precursor molecule from which warfarin, one of the most widely prescribed anticoagulant medications in the world, was eventually developed. In 1940, Carl Link at the University of Wisconsin identified the compound in spoiled sweet clover that was causing hemorrhaging in cattle. He isolated it, and over the following years, that research led directly to the development of warfarin. That drug has been used for decades to prevent blood clots in patients with atrial fibrillation and deep vein thrombosis. The anointing oil formula combined cinnamon and cassia, two closely related plants with overlapping antimicrobial chemistry, but distinctly different secondary compounds. One contributed cinnamaldehyde in its cleanest form. The other contributed cinnamaldehyde alongside a molecule that modern pharmaceutical chemistry turned into a blood-thinning drug. That specific pairing, in those specific proportions, was not accidental. The fifth ingredient makes the chemistry of the other four possible. Number 6. Olive oil. The fifth ingredient in the anointing oil is a hin of olive oil, roughly 4 liters, the carrier that holds the 4 aromatic compounds together as a single preparation. Olive oil appears independently earlier in the same book of Exodus, where Moses is instructed to source only pure, beaten olive oil, the first cold-pressed extraction from fresh fruit, to fuel the menorah flame in the tabernacle. The quality specification was precise. Not any oil, but the first cold-pressed extraction from fresh fruit. The biology of what is inside high-quality olive oil was not understood until quite recently. The compound that has attracted the most serious research attention is oleocanthal. Discovered by American food chemist Paul Breslin in 2005, oleocanthal is a polyphenol present in abundance in fresh, first-press olive oil. It inhibits the COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes, the same enzymes ibuprofen inhibits. That mild, peppery burn you feel in the back of your throat when you drink good olive oil is not a flaw or an impurity. It is oleocanthal activating the same pain receptor that ibuprofen activates. A 50-gram daily serving of high-quality extra virgin olive oil delivers an oleocanthal dose roughly equivalent to 10% of a standard ibuprofen pain relief dose. Leviticus required pure, beaten olive oil. That requirement would have selected for maximum polyphenol content. Every time the priests refilled the menorah inside the cedar-paneled tabernacle walls, they were working with the most anti-inflammatory form of the oil available to them. Number 7. Cedar. Cedar appears alongside hyssop in 2 separate purification rituals in the wilderness narrative. In the ceremony of the red heifer described in Numbers, the priest throws cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet thread into the fire. In the Leviticus 14 cleansing ritual for someone recovered from a skin disease, cedar and hyssop are again prescribed together. They are dipped in water and used for ritual sprinkling. The cedar of the ancient Levant was most likely Cedrus libani, the cedar of Lebanon, which grew in dense forests across what is now Lebanon, Syria, and southern Turkey. Cedar of Lebanon was the prestige construction material of the ancient world, used in Solomon's temple, in Egyptian palace beams, and in the cedar-paneled interiors of Assyrian royal buildings. But its role in purification rituals was distinct from its architectural reputation. Cedarwood oil contains a compound called cedrol, which has shown antifungal and antibacterial properties in laboratory analysis. More practically, cedarwood has been confirmed in modern research as a natural insect repellent, effective against mosquitoes, moths, and certain beetles. Ancient woodworkers knew this empirically, and cedar-lined storage spaces became traditional across multiple cultures for protecting textiles and grain from insect damage. When cedar was burned in an enclosed space, the smoke produced cedrol vapor throughout the area. Fumigation with insect-repelling and antimicrobial plant compounds was used to purify a space after illness or death. The chemistry of the wood produces exactly the effect the ritual describes. If you are finding this useful, this is a good moment to hit subscribe. The last 5 plants on this list move into territory that rarely gets connected to the biblical record, including one that contains 3 compounds currently on the World Health Organization Essential Medicines list. We cover this kind of history every week. Number 8. Pomegranate. In Numbers chapter 13, Moses sends 12 men into Canaan to assess the land. They return after 40 days carrying proof. Among the items they bring back from the valley of Eshcol are pomegranates, alongside figs and a grape cluster so large that 2 men carry it between them on a wooden pole. The pomegranate also appears in Exodus as a decorative element on the hem of the high priest's robe, with alternating golden bells and woven pomegranates running around the border of the garment. It is one of the 7 species listed in Deuteronomy as the defining foods of the land Israel was moving toward. Modern nutritional science has given pomegranates significant research attention, and the findings have been consistent. The primary compounds of interest are called punicalagins, large polyphenol molecules found almost exclusively in pomegranate. They are among the highest antioxidant densities measured in any food, with activity roughly 3 times that of red wine or green tea in standardized comparisons. Pomegranate extract has been examined in clinical studies for effects on arterial health. One study published in Clinical Nutrition followed subjects consuming daily pomegranate juice and found measurable reductions in arterial plaque after 1 year. The research remains in early stages, but the direction of findings has been consistent across independent groups. The scouts walked out of an unknown land carrying pomegranates as evidence of what the land could grow. The fruit they carried, measured now against every other food in a laboratory, still ranks at the top. But pomegranates were not the only thing in those scouts' arms. Number 9. Fig. The fig traveled alongside the pomegranate in the scouts' report from Canaan, and it shares the pomegranate's place in the list of 7 species in Deuteronomy. The fig tree Ficus carica has been cultivated in the Middle East for at least 11,000 years, which makes it one of the earliest domesticated plants in human history. Before wheat was fully domesticated in the archaeological record, fig cultivation was already established in the Jordan Valley. The pharmacological interest in figs centers on a few distinct areas. Phycin, a proteolytic enzyme found in fig latex and in smaller concentrations in the fruit itself, has been studied for antiparasitic activity, particularly against intestinal worms, and for anti-inflammatory effects that operate differently from standard polyphenol pathways. Figs also contain pisoralens, compounds currently used in a clinical treatment called PUVA therapy for psoriasis and certain other skin conditions. That therapeutic application of a fig compound was documented empirically by ancient herbalists centuries before the mechanism was understood. For gut health, dried figs are notably high in prebiotic fiber, and researchers studying gut microbiome composition have found measurable effects from consistent fig consumption on the diversity and abundance of beneficial bacteria. The land was described as flowing with milk and honey, but also as defined by its figs and pomegranates. Whatever the Israelites understood about those plants, they carried that understanding into their most important texts. The next plant was honored with even more specificity than either of them. Number 10. Almond. Numbers chapter 17 records an event that stands apart from the standard wilderness narrative. Moses places the staff of each of the 12 tribal leaders inside the tabernacle overnight, asking God to identify the tribe he has chosen for the priesthood through a visible sign. In the morning, 11 staffs are unchanged. Aaron's staff, representing the tribe of Levi, underwent 3 simultaneous stages of botanical development. It sprouted, produced blossoms, and bore ripe almonds. All 3 stages appeared on a cut piece of dead wood overnight. The almond is present even earlier in Exodus, when God gives Moses the design specifications for the menorah, the 7-branched lampstand that burned continuously in the tabernacle. The instructions specify that each branch should be shaped to resemble an almond branch, with cups fashioned to look like almond blossoms at each junction. The almond is the structural model of the sacred light. This choice is not arbitrary botanically. The almond tree, Prunus dulcis, blooms before any other fruit tree in the agricultural calendar of the ancient Levant, often in January or early February, while everything else is still dormant. In Hebrew, the almond's name shares a root with a word meaning to watch or to hasten, a name given to the tree that wakes before all the others, already in bloom while the fields are still bare and cold. Modern nutritional research on almonds has been substantial. They are notably rich in monounsaturated fats, vitamin E, magnesium, and dietary fiber. The vitamin E concentration in almonds is among the highest of any commonly eaten food, and vitamin E functions as a lipid-soluble antioxidant that protects cell membranes from oxidative damage. Multiple large cohort studies have associated consistent almond consumption with reduced LDL cholesterol levels and lower cardiovascular event risk. A randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that replacing habitual snacks with almonds over 12 weeks produced significant reductions in central adiposity and LDL levels compared to the control group. The almond was the sacred design of the menorah, the sign that authenticated the priesthood, and a food that modern epidemiology continues to document as beneficial for the human heart. The next plant on the list carries a very different history and a reputation that the ancient world took seriously for reasons that turned out to be pharmacologically exact. Number 11. Mandrake. This plant's appearance in the biblical narrative comes before Moses, in Genesis, when the patriarch Jacob's family was still forming in Canaan. Leah's son Reuben finds mandrakes in the field during the wheat harvest. Rachel, who has been unable to conceive, wants them urgently enough to negotiate for them, trading her right to sleep with their shared husband for the mandrake plants Reuben found. The exchange is brief in the text, but it signals clearly that mandrakes were understood as potent, sought after, and not to be casually discarded. The plant's reputation in the ancient world was extraordinary. Mandragora officinarum grows across the Mediterranean and Middle East, with large, dark leaves close to the ground and a thick, forked root that resembles the human body closely enough to generate centuries of folklore about its properties. Ancient herbalists attributed to it fertility enhancement, sedation, pain relief, and in higher doses, hallucinatory and dangerous effects. The folklore was tracking something real. Mandrake contains a concentrated set of tropane alkaloids, specifically scopolamine, hyoscyamine, and atropine, in amounts that produce potent physiological effects in any person who consumes the plant. All 3 compounds are now in active pharmaceutical use. Scopolamine is used as a pre-surgical medication and as a treatment for motion sickness and post-operative nausea. It appears in patches worn behind the ear before sea travel. Hyoscyamine is used for irritable bowel syndrome and certain gastrointestinal spasms. Atropine is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines used in emergency medicine for organophosphate poisoning, in ophthalmology to dilate pupils, and in cardiology to manage certain arrhythmias. The biblical account of mandrakes as something traded at significant personal cost was not mythology. It was an accurate assessment of a plant that contained 3 compounds modern medicine depends on. The 12th plant completes the list by returning to where the ritual life of the tabernacle began each morning and ended each evening. Number 12. Frankincense. The final plant brings us back inside the tabernacle. Exodus chapter 30, the same chapter that gives the anointing oil formula, also provides the formula for the sacred incense that was to be burned on the incense altar twice daily. The ingredients include stacte, onycha, galbanum, and frankincense, with frankincense described as the purest of the 4. Leviticus prescribes frankincense as an addition to grain offerings. During the years the Israelites carried the tabernacle through the Sinai and into Canaan, it would have been filled with frankincense smoke every morning and every evening. Frankincense comes from trees in the Boswellia genus, most commonly Boswellia sacra, which grows in the Rocky Mountains of Oman and Yemen, at elevations where the soil is thin and the air is dry. The trees grow directly out of limestone rock faces with almost no visible soil, and they produce more resin under stress than in comfortable conditions. When the bark is scored with a blade, a milky white resin seeps out, hardens over several days in the dry air, and is harvested in irregular pale amber lumps. Burned, it produces a penetrating resinous fragrance that has been documented in ceremonial contexts across nearly every major ancient civilization, with Egyptian temples, Hebrew priests, and Greek, Roman, Indian, and Chinese religious traditions each adopting it independently. The active compounds that have drawn the most pharmacological attention are boswellic acids, particularly a compound known as AKBA, acetyl keto beta boswellic acid. AKBA specifically inhibits an enzyme called 5-lipoxygenase, which plays a key role in the body's inflammatory signaling pathways. This mechanism has made boswellic acids the subject of clinical trials examining rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, asthma, and osteoarthritis, with several trials showing measurable reductions in inflammatory markers and symptom severity. Research published in Cancer Research examined AKBA's effects on brain tumor cells and found the compound could induce cell death in malignant cells while leaving surrounding healthy tissue relatively unaffected. The finding that sits most quietly alongside the tabernacle's daily incense ritual was published in 2008. A research team identified a compound called incensol acetate in frankincense smoke and studied its effects on laboratory mice exposed to it. The mice showed measurably reduced anxiety behaviors and reduced depression-like behaviors. The compound appeared to activate specific ion channels in the brain associated with warmth, emotional regulation, and a sense of well-being. The researchers concluded that incense burning in ancient religious ceremonies may have produced genuine psychoactive effects, not the dramatic hallucinations of high-dose plant alkaloids, but a subtle, consistent shift toward calm and openness in the people who breathed the smoke during worship. The Israelites burning frankincense in the tabernacle twice every day were not simply performing a symbolic act. The smoke itself was doing something to the people inside. 3,000 years of distance separates us from a man in the Sinai Peninsula who received a list. The plants he named were available to him in that landscape. The reasons he recorded for using them, purification, protection, healing, sacred space, align with what laboratories have been finding one study at a time over the past century. Not every alignment is tidy, and the mechanisms are not all fully resolved. But the consistency is difficult to dismiss as coincidence and easy to approach with genuine curiosity. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes from working with these plants. Hyssop dried in a bundle, frankincense burned in the morning, olive oil pressed from a stone mill, and realizing that the people who first wrote about them were paying very close attention. They did not have spectroscopy or controlled trials, but they watched, they recorded, and the records have held longer than most of us expected. If this is the kind of connection your garden makes you think about, the video on screen next goes deeper into the original plants of the biblical diet and what decades of research have found about each one. Subscribe so you catch it when it arrives.